Right now, global capital markets are rallying around a single consensus. If we standardize corporate sustainability reporting, we can eliminate greenwashing. The assumption is that uniform templates will force companies to tell the truth, but that assumption misreads the reality of the ISSB. The International Sustainability Standards Board is a global body creating baseline reporting formats, like the IFRS S1 and S2 standards, which dictate specific sustainability and climate-related disclosure requirements. Adopting these standards dictates exactly what headings a company should use in its reports, but it dictates absolutely nothing about what happens when those claims are materially false. This gap between paper and practice becomes obvious when you compare a pristine corporate filing to the fragmented reality of tropical supply chains. Tracking the exact origin polygon of timber or agricultural commodities across thousands of smallholder farms is a messy, high-friction problem that a standardized PDF cannot solve on its own. To evaluate corporate claims properly, we have to separate three distinct concepts. The first is verifiability. This is a strictly epistemic property. It simply asks whether a specific claim can actually be checked against physical evidence or data. The second concept is reliability. This is a decision property. It measures whether an investor or a supply chain buyer is actually justified in trusting the claim, factoring in the inherent uncertainty of the data and the financial incentives of the company preparing it. The third concept is credibility. Credibility is an institutional property. It defines whether the legal and regulatory system surrounding the company makes it actively costly for them to falsify their data. A shared reporting template is a filing format, not a truth serum. Without credible institutional consequences backing up the document, standardizing the reporting language merely standardizes the greenwashing. This equation shows how trust is actually calculated using the logic of deterrence. A user's rational willingness to rely on a disclosure depends entirely on three interacting variables. The first variable is the perceived probability of activation. This measures the likelihood that a firm will face actual scrutiny from regulators, counterparties, or whistleblowers if their data is wrong. The second variable is the expected consequence, or the remedial bite. This evaluates the severity of the penalty. A meaningful consequence must impact the firm's operations or valuation, separating trivial compliance fines from major market interventions. The divisor in this equation is the time to resolution, or tempo. Enforcement operates on a time discounting principle. If an investigation takes 5 years to conclude, the deterrent effect is severely weakened. Even the harshest statutory penalties lose their power if the institutional machinery is too slow. By the time a delayed correction is forced, the false information has already been priced into the stock, contracted upon by buyers, and reputationally laundered. To convert that deterrence equation from theory into reality, a jurisdiction needs a functioning accountability channel. This is the institutional pathway linking a corporate statement to a real-world consequence, and it is built on 4 structural pillars. Pillar 1 is vehicles. These are the specific legal mediums, like statutory filings, listing rules, or binding contractual attestations, that render a sustainability claim official and legally traceable. Pillar 2 is actors. A robust channel requires competent, independent institutions, supervisors, regulators, and accredited verifiers, who actively monitor the vehicles and have the mandate to investigate anomalies. Pillar 3 is pathways, the procedures through which claims are challenged. This is often the critical choke point. Pathways govern access to evidence through audit rights, document production authority, and whistleblower protections. Contestation without evidence is performance arms. If external challengers, whether they are investors or supply chain partners, cannot access the underlying data to prove a misstatement, the pathway is dead and the accountability channel fails. The final pillar is sanctions. This is the specific consequence set available to regulators or counterparties to ensure that issuing a false statement is an expensive mistake. Within sanctions, there is a crucial distinction between delayed punishment and rapid correction. The power to force a public restatement or withdraw a compliance label immediately is often far more devastating to a company's stock price and trust profile than a minor fine levied years later. Capital allocators must look past the glossy formatting of the ESG report and audit this exact infrastructure. If a jurisdiction lacks traceable vehicles, capable actors, accessible pathways, or meaningful sanctions, the disclosure is structurally compromised from the start. We can see this divergence clearly by applying the Accountability Channel Credibility Scorecard, or ACCS. The ACCS is a 0 to 2-point diagnostic tool used to measure how effectively a system enforces its disclosure rules. We'll apply it to 2 Southeast Asian markets using the exact same ISSB climate reporting standard. First, consider Singapore. The Singapore Exchange embeds sustainability reporting directly into its continuing listing obligations, creating an exchange-centered regulatory approach. This dashboard shows Singapore's ACCS profile. Because the exchange relies heavily on rapid public queries and the threat of trading suspensions to maintain market hygiene, it earns a maximum score of 2 in procedural efficiency, driving a high-tempo corrective environment. Contrast this with Thailand, which embeds sustainability disclosure directly within its statutory 56-1 report filing architecture. Locating the disclosure within a formal statutory filing increases the potential severity of the consequences over the long term. However, because Thailand uses phased implementations and transition reliefs, it temporarily receives a 1 in procedural efficiency, lowering its immediate tempo compared to Singapore. But the scorecard contains a strict veto rule. If either jurisdiction scores a 0 in the pathways pillar, specifically regarding evidence access, their entire accountability channel is capped for high-stakes reliance. An impressive additive score is useless if challengers cannot obtain the raw data to prove a breach. This is the ultimate proof. 2 countries can adopt the exact same reporting headings and yet produce radically different credibility profiles for investors, simply because their domestic accountability architectures operate at different speeds and intensities. This problem extends far beyond securities exchanges. It hits operational reality hardest in the high verification cost environments of fragmented upstream tropical supply chains, where spatial data and land tenure are intensely difficult to map. These producers are facing looming pressure from downstream regulatory regimes. Laws like the EUDR, the European Union Deforestation Regulation, prohibiting the import of commodities linked to recent deforestation, and the CSDDD, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, requiring large companies to manage environmental risks in their supply chains, are converting voluntary upstream claims into strict European compliance variables. When a producing country lacks a credible public accountability infrastructure, the system breaks. European buyers facing massive liability cannot rely on local public data to satisfy European law if that data cannot be challenged or verified. This triggers a phenomenon called audit saturation. Because the public channel fails to provide baseline trust, downstream buyers panic. They flood their upstream suppliers with privatized, overlapping audits and redundant certifications to protect their own compliance status. This dynamic extracts immense value from producing nations. It acts as an aggressive audit premium, placing the financial burden of repetitive verification rituals squarely on the shoulders of upstream small and medium enterprises. Failing to build a credible public ESG infrastructure is a direct threat to global trade. It fractures supply chains by offshoring regulatory panic, forcing developing economies into a punishing, endless cycle of private audits just to maintain market access. Professionals must stop placing blind faith in standard reporting templates. Due diligence requires a new standard practice, channel-aware reliance. Treat your verification budget like a surgical instrument. Map the target jurisdiction's framework to find the exact bottleneck. In most emerging markets, that weak link is evidence access. Do not indiscriminately layer general audits over the entire supply chain. Instead, build specific private contractual microchannels using strict data sharing covenants and audit step-in rights designed explicitly to bridge the exact gap you identified in the public system. For policymakers, the lesson is clear. Hardening your domestic accountability channels is a necessary sovereign development strategy. Credible public enforcement is critical trade infrastructure. Semantic alignment standardizes the vocabulary of sustainability, but true reliability is built, not imported. It is painstakingly constructed through the institutional pathways that make lying simply too expensive to risk.